From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome, I'm Paul Gigot with the opinion page of the Wall Street Journal, and welcome to another edition of Potomac Watch. Our guest today, Doug Burgum, governor of North Dakota, and also a candidate for the Republican presidential nomination. He's one of the founders of Great Plains Software, which he sold to Microsoft for $1.1 billion, elected governor in 2016, reelected in 2020 with about two-thirds of the vote, and now at age 66, running for president of the United States. Welcome, Governor Burgum.
Great to be here.
Certainly, you were surprised for a lot of people when you announced that you were going to run for president. North Dakota, not exactly the hotbed of presidential candidacies. And I think a lot of people are wondering, why do you think you have a chance to win this nomination?
Well, North Dakota is it's the hotbed of small town values. It's the hotbed of innovation. It's the hotbed right now of a great economy. I mean, we're on track to have the highest GDP of any state in the nation. So there's a lot of great things that are going on there. And of course, with those North Dakotans with the highest workforce participation in the nation in North Dakota, now among the highest birth rate in the country, we're feeding and fueling the world. But the case is a small town kid, grew up understanding agriculture, and with my dad having passed away when I was a freshman in high school, World War II Navy vet, went on to take a piece of farm ground I got from him. That became the seed capital for Great Plains. And we took kids from a couple hundred small towns and we built a 2,000 person company, customers in over 130 countries, hundreds of thousands of customers, and really understand the global economy, understand technology. And that's part of what we bring to this, because technology is changing every job, every company, every industry. It hasn't yet changed government. It needs to change government, it needs to change healthcare, it needs to change education. We can do it better, faster, more efficiently. And we can also build safer, smarter cities. And we've spent a lot of time thinking about that in North Dakota, and we care deeply about the issues that matter most to most Americans, and that includes the economy. This Biden inflation, a 10% pay cut last year, 5% pay cut this year is what the Biden administration is bragging about, because that's the decrease in buying power, but that doesn't include food or energy. And we know that the families that are going to the grocery store, they know the inflation's a lot more than 5%, and they know the price of the pump and the price for heating oil and the price of their electric bill. And that's why you can't separate the economy from energy and energy policy. And then that's the Biden energy policies are raising the costs on all Americans, and they're also creating global instability. It's empowering foreign dictators like Putin and destabilizing the world. I'm sure we'll talk about all that, but that's why we're running this, because we think we need to have a leader that understands these issues and is willing to focus on the things that matter in terms of, because we know that by running, we can improve the life of every American, and that their economic life and their in every other aspect of their life.
Let's dig into the economic point. North Dakota, a big oil and gas producing state, so energy is a big component of your growth agenda. But what else is on the table when you think of, from a policy point of view, to be able to get us back to GDP growth of 3% a year and real income growth, which is, I assume, one of the goals? I mean, do you have a tax program on the table? Are taxes part of this? Should we cut taxes, and how?
Well, one of the things that we have to do is cut the red tape. We say innovation, not regulation. The American has always, our economy, back to the very beginnings, and whether it's transcontinental railroads, the invention of flight, telecommunications, the computer, all of these things where the U.S. has led. Why we have the largest economy in the world is because of innovation. And right now, there just seems to be a huge focus on every industry, from small businesses to large businesses. So we have to figure out a way to just cut the red tape.
Did you like the Trump policy of getting rid of 2 regulations for every new one?
I do, but I also think that we can do more than that, because some of this is just saying the federal government shouldn't be even in the business. It's not even their job. It's not in the job description. Move it to the states or to the people, as it says in the 10th Amendment. Do those 2 things, and we have to become more nimble. I think of each state as a platform of innovation. I think it drives the Biden administration. When we want to do something differently than a neighboring state does, they want a one-size-fits-all rule, and what we really need to be doing is allow the innovation to flourish, allow states to try different approaches, and that's going to help produce that dynamic approach to our economy that's going to allow us to get our growth rate. I think we can get it higher than 3%. But spending, taxes, inflation, the inflationary federal spending that's gone on, that's got to quit. We take a look at North Dakota, federal infrastructure dollars are coming through. We're not looking at 5%. When we're doing road bids this spring to build new roads, they were all coming in at 30% higher. Well, if I was in the private sector, we'd say it doesn't pencil out, we won't do it.
That's what the people want for the bid.
Yeah. And it's because of labor, it's because of supply chain, it's steel, rebar, concrete.
Would you repeal the Inflation Reduction Act if you had a chance? Would you try to?
Yeah.
All the subsidies for the green energy and for all of that?
Some of it makes no sense. And then some of it is basically just a play to his voter base. I mean, some of this is, hey, if you got to use union labor to get something done, and it has to be made in America with union labor, and we don't even make a precision part. We had a water project that we were trying to do, essential infrastructure, before that we were going to get bid out at $35 million. It came in after this at $65 million because of the ideological restrictions and red tape that were dumped in by the Biden administration, because I guess we can't buy a precision pump from our ally Germany anymore.
So tax policy, I mean, you pushed in North Dakota and they didn't quite get there, but you made some significant reduction in tax rates. You tried to get a flat tax. Would you push for a flat tax in Washington?
Well, I think flat tax makes a ton of sense because part of it is you don't need as many people to administer it. I'm sorry, but we could free up some tax lawyers in this country. We've got 11 million jobs available in our country. Anything we can do to make government regulations, that reduce the amount of labor that goes into managing the regulations, frees up that capacity to work on actually wealth creating opportunities that raises the boat for everybody.
But no specific proposal right now on taxes that you're promoting.
Well, nothing specific, but I would say today, but what we've followed in North Dakota is we got very close to have the lowest flat tax in the nation. We did eliminate.
What's the top rate?
1.95%, but the bottom 60%, it's zero. So 60% of the people don't pay any income tax. And those are the people that we've got and that's, CDL drivers, that's teachers, that's nurses. I mean, the people that we need to do the jobs that keep America working, the people that get up and, are fighting for their families. In North Dakota, they're not paying any income tax today.
What about trade policy? It's obviously become a big issue since Donald Trump put trade, particularly with China, on the agenda. Do you think his tariff policies were successful?
I think some of them were overstated. I mean, let's take soybeans. A lot of the soybean sales that were going from Midwestern farmers ended up getting shifted to Brazil. I mean, sometimes because he slapped the tariffs on Chinese goods, they retaliated by putting tariffs on American food exports. Yes. And then they just said, hey,
we'll buy from Brazil.
We'll buy from somebody else that doesn't have them. I mean, we have to have an understanding that we're not the sole source for some of these products. And so if you've got a commodity like soybeans and you say, hey, we're going to make it more expensive for you to buy ours, people go buy them someplace else. We have to be competitive. And the way you win in a business is you get more customers, not less. And so we have to have a trade policy that helps us expand markets, not restrict markets.
Well, you ran a company with a global reach. I mean, trade for your business was essential. Mm-hmm. Trade for farmers is essential globally because we don't have only a domestic market to sell to. They need that global market. But both Biden and Trump have been really not willing to expand new bilateral trade agreements, and much less multilateral trade agreements like the Asia joining the Trans-Pacific Partnership, now renamed. Would you push for more of those kinds of trade agreements?
Well, I think of it as I bring a competitive mindset. I bring a CEO mindset to the job, and we have to figure out what do we do well, who wants to buy it, who do we sell to, where do we have a competitive advantage, and let's figure out how we can sell more U.S. products in more places. And then conversely, what are the things that we can do to onshore? What can we do where we can stop being dependent on our adversaries? And energy is one of these topics where the Biden administration has a de facto policy of, we're going to buy energy from our enemies and our adversaries and stop selling it to our allies. And it ought to be 180 degrees different direction. We should be selling energy to our friends and allies, stop buying it from our adversaries. And if you cared about the environment, you'd want to do that too, because the U.S. produces energy cleaner, safer, better than anywhere else in the world.
All right, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll have more with Doug Burgum, governor of North Dakota and candidate for president. Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast. That is, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot, and we're here with Doug Burgum, governor of North Dakota, candidate for president. We're talking about his agenda if he becomes president of the United States. Who do you listen to for economic advice? Do you have any favorite economists or anybody in business that you think is particularly good at it?
Well, as you may have understood, I believe economics is the source of what drives much of what goes on in this world. And so I've read a lot over the years. And of course, I love reading in the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, God bless you. But I mean, no economists in particular, or anybody that you can think of who
you start naming names and then people start putting labels on you about that you're this or that kind of thing. But I would say that understand that markets and technology and the free movement of goods has lifted 1 billion people out of poverty, in this globe in the last 20 years. That's never happened in anyone's lifetime. I've had the honor to be part of the industries that have made that happen. And one of the ways that we can reduce the tension and conflict of this world is figure out a way that I like to say sometimes how high is up. We tend to be so self-constraining in what we think is possible for America. The opportunity for us to have an economy that actually creates the solutions, that we solve the problems related to health, we solve the problems related to safe cities, we solve the problems related to concerns that people may have about CO2. We can solve all those through innovation. And part of what we want to do is unleash the best of America, but we have to stop fighting with each other in this country. Instead of neighbors helping neighbors, we have neighbors that don't talk to neighbors anymore because of the divisiveness of politics. And that doesn't represent the majority of Americans. The battles that are occurring are happening from one far edge to the other. And part of what we have to have happen is we've got to have that exhausted majority in the middle get engaged again and say, hey, we care deeply about our kids and our next generation, and we want to work together to solve these issues. And the way to solve them is to get the economy really rolling.
I've covered a lot of political campaigns and a lot of politicians going back to the 70s, and I've heard a lot of politicians, and I don't mean that in any pejorative sense, talk about bringing the values of business, the efficiency of business to government. I want to run government like a business. I covered the John Y. Brown, remember the old Kentucky Fried Chicken guy who became governor of Kentucky? I covered his political campaign, and he talked about that. But every time somebody tries to do this, they run up, in my experience, against the different incentives of politics and the different incentives of government. How can you be different and bring that kind of a business mindset to Washington and not run up against the same rocks?
Well, I think one of the differences is the business that I came from, which is, again, when I grew up with a, small town agriculture background, but most of my career was spent in technology and specifically in software. And in software, there were no regulations. There were no subsidies. There wasn't tariffs that protected us. I mean, a competitor could show up on the other side of the globe and they could be selling the same product for less money tomorrow, or in many cases, people said, oh, we're going to give it away for free and we're going to make it up someplace else in our business model. When you're in that kind of unabashed free market competition, you have to have your product and your services get better and cheaper and faster tomorrow than they were today. So you're always striving for efficiency. And that's the mindset that we brought when we were brought to the state of North Dakota. We cut $1.7 billion out of a $6 billion general fund our first 4 months in office, and all the trains kept running on time. But part of that is you just have to say, hey, we're 20 or 30 years behind. We're not 2 years behind in government. How do we make things run more smoothly? And everything from getting a driver's license. Well, you get a driver's license, but over here, there's a separate silo. That's where you get your fishing license. Oh, there's another silo. That's just your boat license. I mean, we all know today in the world that even in rural North Dakota, the citizen experience is a couple things. It's the Apple App Store and it's Amazon Prime. That's the experience. And if we're not delivering that, if we're still in the business of trying to make people go to 157 different websites, as opposed to we know who you are, you've lived here your whole life, here's how you can do your renewal on your phone for all a variety of these government services, that's what we have to get to. And the federal government, I haven't even heard one conversation about that. So there is different types of business leaders, but business leaders that have created value for their shareholders, business leaders that understand how to, drive automation, because then this is the things that the federal government spends money on, healthcare and education, also can benefit from these improvements in productivity.
All right, let me talk about national security a bit. He's part of your campaign. How do you think President Biden has handled the war in Ukraine? What do you think he's done right? What do you think he's done wrong?
Well, I think we wouldn't even have a war in Ukraine if we had a different energy policy. I don't even think we'd be talking about how much money we're sending to the Ukraine, because the only way that Putin feels emboldened to invade Ukraine is two things. One is our abysmal withdrawal from Afghanistan. And as the commander-in-chief of the North Dakota National Guard, and we've got Gold Star mothers in North Dakota, 29 soldiers lost their lives from North Dakota in Afghanistan. To have to face those parents when they see that kind of withdrawal, I mean, that's what their sons fought for and died for the U.S., when we're just saying, hey, we don't need to do this anymore. And then secondly, the signaling, you've covered this in your lifetime. You can't say things like President Biden said, which is, Well, if it's a small incursion, then maybe it won't be a problem. I mean, talk about green lighting an invasion
So
for
failure
Putin.
of deterrence, number one.
Yes.
All right.
And then failure of economic and energy policy because all of Western Europe was dependent on Russian oil and gas. He invades, the price goes up. The first 3 months after the invasion was a complete cash flow bonanza for Putin and all of his criminal organizations that operate as part of his power structures.
So what are we doing? Should we be continuing to arm Ukraine until they can push Russia out of the territory it's conquered?
We have to continue to support Ukraine, and we cannot have there be a win for Putin. We talk about, NATO. NATO's meeting this week. Who's on the front lines fighting for NATO right now? Ukraine is fighting. I mean, we talk about the NATO alliance, but it's Ukrainian citizens that are fighting and dying. And of course, everybody else that's on the front line. I mean, the Estonia, Latvia, those countries, they're also sort of next in line. Of course, they're the ones that are saying we should get Ukraine into NATO right now because they're doing the job of what an alliance should mean.
So should we expand NATO to include Ukraine?
I think that has to happen after the war is completed. I think everybody's been clear about that, but we certainly should be getting Sweden in, and I hope that we can figure out how to get that done quickly.
Okay. And what about those who argue that, and there's some conservative strategists who argue that because we're devoting so many resources and a lot of ammo to Europe and to Ukraine, we are under providing Taiwan for the defense. We are underprepared to counter a possible invasion by China of Taiwan. Do you give any credence to that argument?
I love your line of thinking, Paul, because you understand, as some act like these are separate, but when we put sanctions on Russian oil, belatedly, but we did it, and then Russian oil is 20% off the world market, Russia, one of the largest exporters of oil and gas, is selling at 20% off to the largest importer of oil and gas in the world, China, over 10 million barrels a day that China imports. So China's getting oil and gas from their gas station called Russia at 20% off. And I know that, the Iowa farmers would like to get 20% off.
We shouldn't put sanctions on Russian oil. We should have just continued to let Europe and the world buy it at the regular global price.
Here's again, back on the soybean example, if we put sanctions on something that's a commodity, you're just shifting who supplies who. And why would we want to have a policy that enables our biggest adversary, China, to actually have cheaper energy than we do? And cheaper and dirtier energy. I mean, if you're really concerned about the environment, then we should be producing and selling all the energy to the whole world because the U.S. produces it cleaner than everybody else as opposed to restricting it. But on Taiwan, we have to be able to do two things at once. But this is why I've said, we're in a Cold War with China. We're actually in a war with Russia. We just haven't sent troops yet. And so these are the kinds of things where we would say, who's Chamberlain in this picture? Because are we going to end up in a World War III, literally, or are we going to avert that because we start using economic statecraft and our economic power to be able to play a role in the world to bring some stability?
Well, when you say economic statecraft and you talk about a Cold War with China, I think the question that comes to my mind is, all right, you're suggesting we're going to use economic leverage against China to get it to do some of the things that we would like it to do, play by the rules of trade and so on, but also on security grounds. You think they're linked. What do you do economically to actually put pressure on China to make sure that it is going to say, our interests are such that we don't want to continue to be an aggressor on national security? What do you do specifically to influence Chinese behavior?
Well, if you take a look again on how this ties back, the entire Chinese economy can't run unless they're importing 10 million barrels of oil a day. And not only have we giving them discounted Russian oil, the Biden administration has pushed most of the Middle East partners towards China as well with a policy there. So we are in a spot where we have to not just do a course correction, we have to do a 180-degree turn.
But how is the United States going to be able to cut off the Middle East countries from selling to China?
Well, you're not going to be able to, but you could stop trying to kill U.S. energy here, and that would allow U.S. energy to be more competitive. And if we had more supply, then we would be more competitive with all these countries.
I assume that's liquefied natural gas in particular for export because they need a lot of LNG.
Yeah, we were in Japan for a trade mission in October. North Korea shot a missile over the top of Japan while we were there. And the Japanese executives in the meeting we were with one of the large trading companies some of them were getting the text, some weren't on the automatic system that says, hey, there's a missile coming. But they're our ally. They were the number 2 economy for a long time in the world. In the U.S. post-World War II, our policies helped create them as one of our largest trading partners. They import 100% of their oil and gas. They have no oil and gas production. there right now. All of that is coming from either Sumatra or the Middle East. China's got the largest Navy. They're super nervous. They would say, hey, could we buy from the Permian or the Bakken? They would buy all the LNG that we could give Japan for the next 20 years. They'd sign up right now. They'd love to have a supply chain that did not include the South China Sea, that just went along British Columbia and the Aleutians, a safe, secure route that the U.S. could defend. And they would do that. You can't get a pipeline permitted by the Biden administration to run liquid natural gas from the center of this country through California, Oregon, or Washington. You can't. So we should be exporting off the West Coast, Japan, Philippines, South Korea. We should be selling energy to our allies. That helps stabilize that region for sure.
Before we go, I want to ask you about one question about January 6th, 2021. What responsibility do you think Donald Trump had for the riot that day?
Well, I think a lot of people are going to, pundits and legal teams are going to try to sort all of this out. But I believe that in our country, that one of the hallmarks that our country has had has been the most unique of any country in the world for 250 years. And that's when we have elections, the ballots get counted. And they were contested in 1960, they were contested in 2000, but we have been able to have a peaceful handoff of power. And the whole world was looking at us and going, wow, is this the end for the United States?
But did he have a moral responsibility? Does he bear a moral responsibility for some of the violence that day?
I will let others draw judgment. Pundits and others that would do that. I just know if in a leadership role that I was in, part of what we have to do, the executive branch job is to lead the country and unite the country and to be our face to the world. If you want to be fighting back and forth on partisan stuff, then hey, run for Congress, run for Senate. That's the job. That's where the debates happen, in Congress. The executive branch, our country and the world needs leadership that understands that when the world is watching, that we have to be a role model for how we lead. And in those moments, I can tell you under a Burgum administration, there would not be a January 6th.
Doug Burgum, governor of North Dakota, thank you for stopping by Potomac Watch. We're here every day on Potomac Watch, and so please join us tomorrow. Governor, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Paul. Great to be with you.